Hello everyone, Kurt Alfred here, and welcome to a quick video here in regards to answering a question that was brought to me in one of the comments. There was a viewer that recently had sent a message to me and asked a question about how is it that you are, how do you get around the realization that what you are teaching, these things that you're teaching can hurt people? And how is that, how do you reconcile with that? And I think it's a very good question. And I want to thank that viewer for putting that out there, because the reality is, I don't know how many people talk about this. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, I don't know. But I feel like this is an important conversation and something that needed to be broadband shared rather than just a one-on-one response. So the big thing about how it is that I feel like I can get reconciled with the fact of what I'm teaching is, first and foremost, while yes, I am teaching how I think that the technique works and why it works the way that it does, I by no means am celebrating the violence of it. Now, that does not mean that it is okay to replicate these things in any form or fashion. What it does, however, mean is that I am coming at this with a state of awareness that this is for the purpose of understanding martial arts. There's a reason why my channel is not made for kids. There's a reason why I have 2 warnings. There's a reason why there's times out there that I realize, okay, make this for, right here is like, age restricted, because we're going to be talking about things in that regard that are very important to look at. One of the reasons why I got into this in the first place was because initially I didn't pay a lot of attention to Fiore in his manuscripts, and it wouldn't be until about 5 years ago that I really started to dig deep into what it is that he was writing on, to understand other concepts, but then I just never left his concepts. The reason I stayed there for so long is because as I started reading it, I found lots of commonality with a lot of stuff I was trained in with the Marines, with the MCMAT program, Marine Combat Training Program. And I mean, I'm not an infantry guy, so I was an aviation ordnanceman, but he still teaches combat basics. Much of what is in that manuscript is meant, and I think intended, for the same kind of spirit. It is made for fighting, and it is not made for a good time, if you will. In fact, in the preamble section of the manuscript, which is, I think, is one of the most important parts, that gives the context, it gives the reference piece of all of this, he talks about how there's 2 types of abbracciari, embrace, grappling, whatever you want to call it, and that one is for courtly displays, and the other one is entertainment, and the other one is every dirty, nasty trick to preserve one's life. And he talked about the second one. The reason why that is significant is because, depending on what you believe, and I believe that abbracciari is a foundational concept, not just to learn how to fight, but postures that are necessary for the combat professional of the time to operate different combat multipliers like the sword, dagger, lance, axe, and the horse. Also, armor itself is a weapon. So by understanding the basics of where to hit somebody, how to hit somebody, how to steer somebody, how to break somebody, you can start applying these things to combat multipliers. So I share that because essentially that means, by my logic, and I'm not saying it's the only logic, this is my logic, the manuscript is not meant for fun. And yet, how often do we have fun with fencing and other parts that go with that? The part about this right here that is so important for me is that if the heart of what this manuscript is to hurt people and to do it well, to make sure that they don't get up, and there's not a lot of discussion around the ethos to those things and observations to those things, and also maybe a healthy dose of you really don't want to do this to those things, then the likelihood that someone out there is going to do it thinking it's a cool move to do in a tournament, or hey, this is pretty fun right here, is greatly enhanced. In the book The Unfettered Mind by Taekwondo Soho, who basically talks about how coming to knowledge without a teacher is you have a very profound lesson. And I'm paraphrasing. I encourage anybody out there, correct me on my translation or interpretation of that. How I see that, what he's saying is that people that come across something without someone to teach them, it is the response and learning is really big. So if you sit there and the whole point of making this one technique was to sever a thing right here to hurt somebody and so on and so forth, and you come to that by accident while you're having fun, that is a really bad day and a really bad way to learn that, especially when it's your friend. So that's the thing about hurting and combat and everything else, is that it is both incredibly easy to do and incredibly almost impossible to do. It's easy to do because you can do anything. You can hurt somebody ignorantly, not knowing that that's going to be the thing to do this, or be like, oh, it's not that bad of a deal, I'm not actually doing the technique here, when the reality is you are doing the technique. And it's also very difficult to do the technique when you're trying to do it for real and you know you are. Those are important conversations I think any martial artist needs to have with themselves, with a teacher, with anything. And I certainly am not everybody's teacher. That's not what I'm proposing here, not at all. But I do feel it's important, especially as I go through this manuscript, which I find incredibly powerful, that I have to come across this and teach this in such a way that gives perspective and understanding and ownership to what it is that you're learning. The greater lesson in all this for me is that violence is never the answer. And if you choose violence, then every step, even if you walk away unhindered, every step is the wrong step. And you will have the marks of those moments on you for the rest of your life. So with those being the case, that kind of reverence and understanding of a situation is a very important piece out there for, I think, that people need to have those conversations. And I am not celebrating the violence that is written in these manuscripts. In fact, if anything, I look at Fiore as a person who was probably very traumatized and probably saw a lot of horrible stuff, especially if you know more about what was happening in the 1360s to mid-15th century, especially just with the bubonic plague, the Black Death itself. Never mind all the war and upheaval that's happening. So to look at this and read this is a man who knows what he's doing. And he is a teacher, maestro. He's a teacher of arms. And he probably comes to this also with an understanding to teach things to people in a spot and a time that gives the understanding of what it is that you're actually doing here and why you're doing it. But for us, the readers, we also get a little bit of that as well. We get what this intent of the book is, which is violence. It's hurting. Knowing effective strikes, the temples, the eyeballs, underneath the throat. These are not spots right here. If you hit somebody, well, they're going to have a bad day, and you are probably also. Legally, but also mentally, emotionally. I get around what I am teaching, and I get around the reality of what I'm doing because I have no illusions. That does not make me better or worse. It just means that I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky to have stumbled upon this and to have had the experience I've had to look at this manuscript and to say, okay, I've seen this before. I take it on myself to share my experiences because I don't want anyone to hurt anybody, as the book would surely have you do if you carried it through. Because we're in this to understand something. We're not in this to actually raid towns and to earn your praise and everything else and to basically have your status within society. We're doing this as modern day people, modern day human beings who get to look at something that is incredibly privileged even today to learn, but also at the time even more privileged. And on top of all that, we also have the ability to look at it with an understanding that we're not actually going to have to do this. I'm going to go off and, I don't know, be a tech broker or something like this afterwards. I'm going to have fun with my sword, but then I'm going to go back to life. And this time, that's not the case. That is the life. And we today have to respect and understand that. So in that little bit of glimpse that we get to have that there, my hope is that people take away the realization that these techniques are very effective, brutal, and honest. it is better to use one's intellect. Perhaps the man that stands within the Senyo, as Greg Maley has told me, that's the fifth element, the man himself, intellect. Perhaps it's better for us to use that before we use the other animal sides of us. And perhaps that violence is not the answer. I use this right here because I believe that being a martial artist is an incredible way to learn yourself and to learn how to breathe and be for yourself in moments that are heightenedly stressed and also frustrating. So I'm going to close this here and I'm going to say thank you to that viewer. I appreciate that comment and that question. That's how I get around it. And one thing also I might add is that, how I was taught, I'm talking about the interpretation of where to hit and everything else and why these are the cases. Largely because I want people not to do it. But also, I teach those things, and it's not under the same stress consideration that I learned in combat training, where you have someone screaming at you, and all the things that come with that, and the stressors that come on that, and you do it under that stress. We're not doing that. We get to have a different takeaway from that. One that may or may not be accurate, but in the modern era, suffices for our purposes of martial artists and not men-at-arms or knights. So, again, I hope this answers that question, and I thank you so much for sending that out there because I think it's a good question. I'm really happy that you put it out there. And it is also something that I believe is a good conversation for everyone else to have. So that's going to close this video right here. And again, please leave a comment. Let me know what you're thinking on this. I love to fight. That's the thing. I'm not saying you don't have fun fighting, but just know what you're doing is my big thing. It's what I was taught. My sensei taught the same thing here within Kendo, and that's a sport, but he talked about how these things can hurt people, and there's a huge reverence to how you carried things. And these are just bamboo swords. I say just, but they're not just. And that's the reverence piece to this. So I just shared that right there. Let me know what your thoughts are. I hope this finds everyone well. I hope everyone's safe. And as always, keep training and fight on. I'll see you all soon.